Thank you very much indeed, Anne, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What I'm going to do in my short speech this afternoon, or talk to you this afternoon, is first say something about my organisation, explain what we're up to, and then secondly, I'm going to talk about what the UK did in the post-Macondo period, what organisations we put together and what deliveries we had, and then I'm going to say a few things, probably less politely than Mr Pedersen did this morning, about the EU regulation. However, before I get to that, there was also mention made this morning of the incident that is ongoing at Elgin Franklin, and I thought I would just share with you the latest official statement that has come from the Department of Energy on this. So I'm sorry I'm bringing my BlackBerry up here to do this, but I hope the organisers will forgive me breaking the rules for this. It reads as follows: following a report of a well control problem at 12:15 hours on the 25th of March on the Elgin Well Head platform and Rowan Viking drilling rig, the operator, Total E&P UK Limited, with assistance from the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, has completed the evacuation of all crew. All personnel are reported safe and with no injuries. The incident occurred during work to plug and abandon the well, which was no longer producing gas. Total has now shut in all wells, but remote monitoring has revealed that gas continues to be released. In addition, a sheen was observed on the sea surface in the vicinity of the installations. The sheen is believed to be gas condensate. Because of the nature of gas condensate, there is no indication of a risk of significant pollution to the environment. Aerial surveillance, mobilised by Total and conducted at 08:45 hours today, that's yesterday by the way, found a light sheen with a dimension of 6 by 0.75 nautical miles. The estimated quantity of hydrocarbon associated with the sheen is between 2 and 23.5 tonnes. Another aerial surveillance flight departed at 1500 hours today as part of the ongoing monitoring operation of the area. The priority now is to plan an appropriate response to contain the leak and minimise the impact to the environment. Total have established their Emergency Response Centre, ERC, and have activated their oil pollution emergency plan. A Department of Energy offshore environmental inspector has been present in the ERC, and the Department of Energy continues to monitor the ongoing response. The Secretary of State's representative for maritime salvage and intervention is aware of the incident and is closely monitoring Total's response. So that is it. That's the official line, and I know no more, and I'm sure that everybody in this room would wish to join me in wishing the team well at Total in bringing that incident under control as soon as they reasonably can. So maybe if I go back to my talk now, let's say first a few words about my organisation. Some of you may remember us. We used to be called UCOA, the UK Offshore Operators Association. But in 2007, we made the step, which I'm so delighted to hear from the previous speakers that you are making now, of bringing the whole of the industry together. We brought the operators and the contracting community together in a new organisation called Oil and Gas UK. And for us, I must say, it has been a tremendous success. It has greatly improved the quality and the extent of the debate within our association by bringing our friends from the supply chain into the membership of what was UCOA and is now Oil and Gas UK. And I have to say, it has also significantly raised the profile of our industry in the UK too as well. We have three objectives as an organisation, and they are to enhance and actually maximise the recovery of the UK offshore resource, to promote the long-term sustainable future of the UK supply chain, and thirdly, and I think quite importantly, to raise the profile of our industry. As in the UK, actually, the profile of our industry has fallen quite low. We did an Ipsos Mori poll recently, which showed that 70% of the UK population believe that the UK now imports all or most of its oil and gas. The truth is, of course, that we still produce 90% of our oil requirement and about 60% of our gas requirement. But it shows the level to which appreciation of our industry has fallen. And I think that is dangerous, and it's dangerous in a political sense, if none other. And so we're intent upon raising that profile, amongst other things. So congratulations to Oil and Gas Denmark. I think it's a great move, and please be assured that Oil and Gas UK will be ready to work with you in every way that we can. What about this incident, though? When it happened, we sort of knew what to do. And the reason that we knew what to do is that because, as an industry and as an association, there's a long history of collaboration within the UK, particularly on safety matters. It goes back to, well, it goes back to the 1990s, but it really crystallized, I suppose, in one respect, in the year 2000, with the establishment of Step Change in Safety, which you may have heard about. Step Change in Safety is an industry-sponsored initiative, but which brings in the regulators and the trade unions to discuss issues around the safety agenda in the offshore industry and to promote productive initiatives on that. It's been a very, very successful organization. Furthermore, I think born out of that, we had another tragedy in the UK on the 1st of April 2009, when Flight 85N crashed from the skies and killed all 16 men who were on board that flight. As a result of that, and I think given this history of collaboration, we immediately turned to the regulators and to the trade unions, that's the industry, and said we ought to get together without waiting for the results of the official reports and decide what, if anything, we should be doing to enhance and improve aviation safety in the UK. So yes, the first thing we should do, of course, is to check whether we're happy with that safety regime in respect of aviation. And there was an urgent check done on that, and I'm pleased to say that we were. So we were quite comfortable to keep flights going, notwithstanding this incident. And then we went on through something which became known as the Helicopter Task Group to create actually a number of very, very powerful initiatives. They led to, for example, the complete revision of the arrangements for personal locator beacons in the UK offshore. They led to a new provision for different beacons on the helicopters themselves. They actually led to the extension of radar coverage to the whole of the North Sea, which was not the case before. And they also led to advanced detection techniques, HUMS techniques, being put onto helicopters. And there were other things as well. It was a highly productive engagement. So when Macondo came along, we sort of knew what to do. And we wanted to get back into that actually slightly challenging space of sitting down with the concerned regulators, with the trade unions, and with a broad spectrum of industry. And we formed OSPRAG, the Oil Spill Prevention and Response Advisory Group. And the component parts of it were, if this works, well, you can see up there in the top left-hand corner, the relevant regulators, that was the Health and Safety Executive, the Department for Energy, and the Maritime Coast Guard Agency. We brought in, of course, relevant people from the contracting community, and particularly the drilling community, along with a good representation, of course, from the industry. And importantly, the true trade unions, RMT and Unite, came in as well. This was a very challenging space. It was a very, very interesting dynamic. You pull all those people together, senior people from each of those areas. You pose them interesting questions, and in fact, there's no hiding place. Nobody is going to be fobbed off in that environment. And it did, again, prove to be hugely, hugely productive. And I'll try and show you in a few slides how that was so. First, a bit about the organization itself. If there were 20 or so people involved in the steering group of OSPRAG, there were probably well over 200, well, actually more than that, involved in the various advisory groups that fed into OSPRAG itself. And I'll briefly, very briefly, go through each of these and tell you what they were about and what they did. The technical review group, of course, as its name implies, was involved looking at the technical aspects of this and maybe a bit more with prevention than response. But one of the things that it immediately realized that we needed, and probably it was the big gap that we could all see immediately, we had no device in the UKCS to cap a free-flowing well. And if that free-flowing well was in the west of Shetlands, we had another problem in that if it needed a rig to come along and deploy that capping device, we could be waiting on weather for some considerable time. So we set about designing what turned into this. This is the Osprey capping device, paid for by the industry, actually housed in Oil Spill Response's yard now, just outside Aberdeen. And this is quite a lightweight baby. It comes in at 42 tons, which is really quite light for this type of capping device and its specification. And it's got a very strong specification. It can deal with HTHP. It's a very, very fine piece of kit. But critically, it's light so that we can deploy it off a vessel into the west of Shetlands. So with this piece of equipment now, we can actually answer one of the issues about Macondo in the UK. We can cap any free-flowing well in the offshore within 30 days. Of course, it was also necessary to evidence the deployment of this. The authorities insisted that we did. So the second thing that we did in this technical group was that we organized a full-scale physical deployment of the capping device, actually and in waters to the west of Shetland. I should have mentioned that BP were hugely supportive to us in the design of the capping device and brought a lot of their Macondo expertise to bear on that. And in this deployment exercise, again, we had huge support from Total, who were amazing in the way that they helped us with the chartering of the vessels, the construction of the, I have to say, this of course is a dummy capping device. We weren't going to take our new baby out there and play around with that. But this was, by weight and dimensions, an exact replica of it. So we took it out, we deployed it onto a wellhead in the North Sea. We retrieved it. We used cutting devices as well to clear up the seabed and the like. And we also demonstrated the deployment of subsea dispersant as well. The other, I think, very notable construct that came out of the technical group was the construction of the Well Life Cycle Practices Forum. Now, this is an ongoing forum that we will maintain in the UK now, as its name says, in order to deal with well life cycle practices issues. So everything from BOP, integrity guidelines, relief well planning, competency behaviours, human factors and the like is being considered by this group. And it will be this group, by the way, which will consider the lessons that are to be taken from the incident that's now going on in the UKCS. This standing group is a very important part of our construct in the UK going forward. And it's not, again, it's not just a talking shop, it's already been proactive, and it's issued and published a number of guidelines already on well examination, competency of well examiners, and guidelines on competency of wells personnel and the like, and more, as you can see there, is coming. So this is a very important new dimension going forward for Oil and Gas UK. And indeed, out of the second group came something similar, and I'll come to that in a moment. The Oil Spill Response Group, now this was the group that looked at, well, what do we do when the oil is in the water? How do we respond? And it did various things. The first thing that it did was looked at our oil spill response toolkit that we have. We don't deploy all of these issues immediately. It's a sort of cascading deployment depending upon the nature and severity of the incident. But we went through them and we've revalidated every element of that. And all of these elements are now essentially available to us, or to any operator, should they need to call upon them. I would say that there are a couple of issues that have yet to be resolved. Subsea dispersant is still an issue upon which we have some regulatory issues to clear. And shoreline protection, waste disposal is also something that we don't actually have an onshore answer to yet in the UK, although we're working on it pretty hard. Again, it wasn't good enough just to have the plan. The regulators said, and we agreed with them, that we needed to advance every 5 years in the UK, there is to be an exercise of the National Contingency Plan. We agreed that in the light of these circumstances, it was important that we brought that forward, so we brought it forward by 2 years, and we ran a full-scale contingency, a national contingency plan exercise. And again, I have to pay credit to Chevron there, who allowed us to use their facility for that, and were very instrumental in helping the industry through with that. And the other construct that's come out of this other work stream is indeed another very important, ongoing, permanent piece of our establishment in Oil and Gas UK and for the industry, which is the Oil Spill Response Forum. And I should add that this forum, like the previous one, like the Wildlife Cycle Practices Forum, is not just an industry-populated forum. The regulators and the trade unions are in here as well, certainly in the management and the steering committee here. And as this rather busy chart shows you, the Oil Spill Response Forum is going to concern itself with ensuring that we keep up to date and that we keep well, hopefully ahead of the game on all of the issues to do with oil spill response, from the treatment of oil in the water through to the environmental sensitivities that come out. The OPEP work group maybe needs a little bit of explaining. As you heard when I mentioned that press release, they talked about an oil pollution emergency plan. Every operator in the drilling in the oil and gas regime in the UK has to have an oil pollution emergency plan, indicating precisely how they would deal with an incident on a well if one arose. We will, within the Oil Spill Response Forum, assist operators in the development of those plans and do whatever we can to make sure, of course, that they're as performant as possible. The third area of activity we looked at was insurance and indemnity. And there, we immediately saw another thing. I suppose, as we did in the technical group, we saw that we were missing the capping device. In the insurance and indemnity group, we immediately alighted on the fact that the OPOL, which is the Offshore Pollution Liability Agreement, which operates in the UK, which provides effectively strict liability cover, if I could put it that way, for environmental cleanup in the event of a spill, that the limit for that, and it's a mutual scheme that operates within the UK, had really been left fallow for too long and needed increasing, and we over doubled its limit from 120 to $250 million. We also undertook various modelling exercises of UK regional scenarios, which we've shared with the regulator. Importantly, we also updated the Offshore Cooperative Emergency Services Agreement, or OSIS, which is an agreement between ourselves, Denmark, Norway, and the Netherlands to provide mutual assistance in the event of a major offshore incident. And finally, and this is still ongoing work, we look to develop some new financial responsibility guidelines. What do I mean by that? We're working with the Department of Energy to ensure that they can be assured that in the event of an incident, that the operator has adequate financial responsibility to deal with the incident, no matter, if you like, what size of operator is involved. Because in the UK, you will appreciate, we have operators from the super majors down to quite small organisations. Largely, this will, therefore, for most companies, be an insurance-based arrangement. And basically, we're putting together a scheme whereby the Department of Energy can be assured that there is adequate cover in respect of any drilling to cover not only the direct losses involved in that in a pollution sense, but also the cost of control of the well, the capping operation on the well, and any indirect losses as well that might flow from it. The final group was really a consultation group. What we wanted to be in OSPRAG was as open as we possibly could be with everybody else. We had very good liaison between ourselves and the other European national oil industry associations. We also invited the EU into that, and the Commission indeed did send observers along throughout those meetings. As I say, we had good communication and liaison with other international bodies as well. I'm not entirely sure that the European Commission entirely understood everything that we were telling them, but I'll come on to that again in a moment. So, in summary, what do we think about OSPRAG? We think it was frankly, and this isn't I'm not being complacent in saying this, we thought it was an extremely good and productive and inclusive industry regulator union forum. It did present, as I've said, very robust challenge within that group. I repeat it, there was no hiding place. It was a very interesting dynamic. But it did also, we think, provide a very effective response. And it came forward with over 50 recommendations, all of which have been or are in the course of being implemented. And all of this, by the way, before, frankly, almost any of the official reports had come out from the United States. That was similar to the helicopter task group. The helicopter task group actually had completed its work long before the official report on that disaster came out. And that's a point also to note that OSPRAG, having done its work, is stood down. There's no point keeping this ongoing as a standing committee, and in any event, we have formed those two new very important committees, the Wildlife Cycle Practices Forum and the Oil Spill Response Forum. But what has it done? Well, it's confirmed that the UK national regulatory regime is a strong one, and that it drives the right sort of behaviours. It's given the UK a world first, frankly, in capping capability, and it's enabled us to enhance our preparedness and our response toolkit. And it has established these two very important new national forums to take us forward. So OSPRAG was well received. It was well received as well by two inquiries which went forth, one from the UK House of Commons and another one from the UK government itself, which set out an independent regulatory review, the Maitland Review, which again came forward with recommendations, but again gave the UK regulatory regime really a tick in the box. Although nobody is resting on their laurels. You cannot rest on your laurels with safety. This is a process of continuous improvement, and that's why we have those two important forums to take us forward. However, a slightly different view, to some degree, was taken in the EU. I have to say that we did take some exception when, immediately in the light of Macondo, Commissioner Oettinger here called for a drilling moratorium in the UK offshore deeper water areas. And even after the European Parliament had dropped their request for a moratorium, he came back and asked for it again. So we did spend a lot of time trying to persuade the European Commission that they shouldn't go down the road of a regulation, which was pretty clear from an early stage they were intent on doing. And maybe I could pause for a moment to just put the UK and indeed the Danish and Norwegian position in some context here. It is true what the European Commission says. 90% of the oil produced in the EU is produced offshore. It's offshore oil. But 90% of that 90% comes from just three countries: the United Kingdom, Norway, and Denmark. And if you look at oil and gas, then, and you put in then the Netherlands, the overwhelming majority of production comes from just four countries, all of which have extremely robust and fit-for-purpose leading, I think actually sort of accepted global leading safety regimes. If you look to the EU, there are indeed 16 member states who have of the 27, there are 16 member states who have no prospect of any offshore production at all. And the other thing that we note is that, well, I've said it already, the existing regulatory regimes are very well controlled within the UK. Another way to look at this European situation on oil and gas production is this. It's slightly outdated, this chart, but it still holds true. The brown line at the bottom is UK oil and gas production. The green block is the Norwegians. The blue block is you guys, the Danes. And then after that, it's very difficult to discern anything really. They're just sort of thin lines. This is where Europe's offshore oil and gas production lies, and this is, in our view, where it is already extremely well regulated and where there are good safety cultures. However, the Commission has been intent on carrying on with its proposals for a regulation, and they published them in October last year. They cover offshore safety, environmental protection and liabilities and oil spill response, as Mr. Pedersen noted earlier on. And they are billed as a comprehensive blueprint for regulation of the entire industry all across Europe. Currently, they are being discussed in the European Council of Ministers, and we expect the discussion to start shortly in the European Parliament as well. I have to say that the UK is strongly opposed to the regulation, and in that regard, we have very strong alliance, not only across the industry, and I'd say the industry here and across Europe as well, but also politically within the UK as well. There is complete political alliance on this. The government and the opposition parties are all firmly against it, and here are some of the quotes that sort of evidence that. But why do we oppose it? And I'm slightly nervous in this because I'm sure many of you are out there thinking, well, it's another of those damn Brits who's anti the EU. It couldn't be further from the truth, actually, in my case. I am not, and nor is my association, anti-EU. But we do believe, and why we're so dedicated, I think, in our opposition to what is proposed here, is that we see this as a backward step for UK offshore safety, first and foremost. Amongst other things, the way that the regulation is constructed, we will need to deconstruct our existing regulatory regime in the UK. We will have to go through a completely unproductive process of stripping out all of the UK regulation, because you can't have conflicting or UK regulation on the same matter as the EU regulation when it comes in. Because remember, the difference between a regulation and a directive is that a regulation comes in and has legal force everywhere immediately, in every member state, whereas a directive is a requirement upon the member states to adjust their legislation if needed in order to conform with the requirements of the directive. So if they impose this directive, if it were to go through, we would have to dismantle our existing safety regime in the UK and revoke all of that legislation, to swap it for something which is, frankly, something of an unproved model. If you look at what's in there, it is largely based upon the UK regime, and as I say, they've cherry-picked some other things from around Europe as well. So one might say that that's all right, it's basically the UK regime. In fact, the words aren't quite the same, and we are by no means convinced that you can just transfer over from the UK into the EU proposal. Secondly, what this does is moves legal competence from the UK and from Denmark and from Norway into the European Commission. Further legislative proposals on safety will have to come from Europe. They won't be capable of being generated in individual member states as such, because you'll have this all-embracing EU regulation. We think that is a completely unnecessary and actually counterproductive transfer of competency from a national competent organisation into, I'll be careful of my words here, into the European Commission. The cost also far outweighs any possible benefit from this. The Commission have produced an impact assessment, as they must do, with regard to any proposed legislation. That shows that there is a distinct cost benefit for this. We have done our own independent studies, as has our friends in Norway, both of us using respected external consultants. And you won't be surprised to hear that we come to a completely different view. In our view, and we believe that this is an extremely strong case, the costs of this regulation will far, far outweigh any potential benefits. And the costs don't just go to money. The costs go to diversion of regulatory resource. For example, the major hazards report that will be required under the new regulation will require the resubmission of all safety cases that are currently extant in the UK. There are 300 of those. Now, there's cost and time there for the industry, that's one thing. But how are we going to get those 300 safety cases through an already, how should I put it, busy regulator? It just won't happen in a smooth way, and it's bound to involve severe disruption and unnecessary diversion of regulatory resource. And finally, as I've said, we regard this mechanism as entirely lacking proportionality. Why is the EU, which has no inherent competence in this area, why is the EU 27 taking this over? I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to conclude, if I might, with just this final thought. But what about the alternative? Well, in our view, the alternative is a directive. And rather interestingly, there is a directive that could cover the piece. It's the Extractive Industries Directive, which is actually undergoing a review at the moment within in the Commission. In our view, that presents the right way forward on this. That will leave legal competence in the national governments. It will allow the EU to ensure that, hopefully, that better standards are inculcated across Europe. And of course, in that regard, our association, and I'm sure Oil and Gas Denmark and OLF and all other trade associations will be prepared to play their part in that regard. So there you have it. Sorry, I've probably overrun my time. I've tried to give you something of an idea about my organisation, something of an idea about what we did post-Macondo, and something of our views upon the EU regulation. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.